The wind screamed like a living creature, clawing at the metal hull of the transport sled as John Hale pushed through the endless white. Snowflakes, sharp as needles, stung his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, swallowing the frozen wasteland whole. The path to the human outpost was gone, buried beneath meters of snow and ice. His breath came out in ragged clouds, freezing against the inside of his mask. The temperature had dropped so low that even the air seemed to crack when he moved. John had seen storms before on this world cruel and merciless, but this one was different. It was alive. The wind howled as if it wanted him dead. His sled was loaded with supplies, food, and heating fuel for the small research team he lived with. He was supposed to be home hours ago. His daughter, Emma, would be waiting for him at the outpost, maybe staring out the window, worried like always. That thought was what kept him moving, not the hope of survival, not the mission just his daughter's face. The white landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. The horizon had vanished. He could only follow the faint signal on his wrist compass and pray it didn't fail. Each step was heavier than the last. The storm roared louder. Then, through the thick fog of snow, something flickered a small, strange movement, maybe 50 meters ahead. He blinked against the frost covering his visor. At first, he thought it was a trick of the storm. But then he heard it. A sound, weak, trembling, crying. His instincts sharpened. The cry came again, soft but desperate. Without thinking, John dropped the sled rope and moved toward the sound, one slow step after another. His boots sank deep into the snow. The storm seemed to push him back, screaming for him to turn away. But he kept going. The world around him was white and empty until he saw it. There, half buried in a snowdrift, lay a small body. A child, but not human. Her skin was faintly blue, glowing slightly under the stormlight. Her face was delicate, her hair pale as frost. Her small fingers twitched weakly in the snow. Beside her was another figure, a woman, older, taller, with the same blue skin. She was barely conscious, her arm wrapped protectively around the child. John's heart stopped. He had seen their kind before, aliens from the neighboring colony that shared this frozen world with the human settlers. They mostly kept to themselves, but now they were dying. He knelt beside them, brushing snow off their faces. The woman's eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly like dying embers. She tried to speak, her voice soft and broken. "Please, my daughter." She pointed weakly to the child, then collapsed again. John didn't hesitate. There was no question, no thought of, should I help? The father in him answered before the man could. He scooped the child into his arms first, wrapping her in his thick jacket. Her body was frighteningly light. Then he lifted the woman, straining against the weight. The cold bit into his bones, but he didn't care. He turned toward the dark outline of the supply shack, half a kilometer away. It wasn't much, just a steel box in the middle of nowhere, but it had heat. It had life. He tightened his grip and started walking. Each step felt like dragging a mountain. His muscles screamed. The storm hit him harder, as if trying to stop him. His visor iced over. His breath came out in painful gasps. Once he fell, the woman slipping from his arms. He almost didn't get back up. But then he remembered Emma's face, again his daughter, waiting for her father. He imagined her small hand in his, her voice saying, "Come back safe." "Dad," he forced himself to stand, step by step, through the blinding storm. He carried the two strangers toward life. When he finally reached the shack, his legs gave out. He slammed his shoulder against the door until it opened, spilling him and the two bodies inside. The warm air hit his face like fire. He kicked the door shut, collapsed beside the heater, and pulled the emergency blanket around them all. The woman was unconscious. The child shivered violently, her lips blue. John tore open a heating pack, pressing it gently against her chest. "Stay with me, kid," he muttered, his voice trembling. "Don't you die on me now." Minutes passed. The storm roared outside, but inside, a small flame flickered to life. The child's breathing slowed. Her trembling eased. John watched, feeling something he hadn't felt in years' hope. He didn't know who they were or why they were out here. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them die. Not while he was still breathing. The storm outside howled like a monster that refused to die. The metal walls of the small shack trembled with every gust of wind, and snow piled higher against the windows. Inside, John Hale worked tirelessly, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. His thick gloves were soaked, his face red and burned from the cold. But he didn't stop. 2 lives depended on him now. The blue-skinned woman lay still beside the heater, her breathing shallow and uneven. The small girl curled against her mother's arm, covered in a rough blanket. Their alien clothes were made for cold, but not for this, the worst storm of the decade. The temperature outside was low enough to freeze blood in seconds. Even inside, John could feel the chill in his bones. He tore open another heat pack and slid it gently under the woman's blanket. Steam rose faintly from the pack as warmth spread through the air. "Come on, stay with me," he muttered. He wasn't talking to himself this time. He was talking to her. To them, after an hour, the child let out a soft, sound-a-weak cry, almost like a kitten. John turned quickly. Her eyes blinked open, glowing faintly like 2 small stars. She looked frightened and confused, not understanding where she was or who he was. Her tiny hand reached for her mother's face, and John felt something twist in his chest. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. I got you." The child didn't understand his words, but his tone seemed to calm her. She stopped crying and stared at him with wide, bright eyes. John smiled faintly and handed her a small metal cup filled with warm water. She sniffed it, then took a slow sip. Her shoulders relaxed a little. Then the woman stirred. Her head turned slightly, her lips parting as she whispered something in a language John didn't know. Her voice was faint, trembling like the last spark of a dying flame. "Easy," John said, moving closer. "You're hurt. Don't try to talk too much." Her glowing eyes slowly focused on him. "Who are you?" she asked in broken English. Her accent was heavy, her voice hoarse from the cold. "John Hale," he answered. "Engineer. Outpost 7. You crashed near here." She tried to sit up, but pain made her gasp. John gently held her shoulder. "Don't move. You're safe. You and your daughter." At the mention of her daughter, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She reached for the small girl, who was now leaning against John's arm. "Olon," she whispered. "My little one." "She's okay," John said quickly. "Cold, but strong. She's a fighter, like her mother." The woman's lips trembled. "Thank you," she said. "You saved us." John shook his head. "Just did what anyone should do." The woman tried to smile, though her face was pale. No, she said softly. Not everyone would. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being the low hum of the heater and the distant roar of the storm outside. John poured some broth into a small container and handed it to her. She hesitated, then drank slowly, eyes never leaving him. My name is Sira, she said after a while. We were traveling north. Our ship was hit by ice storm. We crashed. My mate. He didn't survive. John lowered his head respectfully. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'll help you both until rescue comes. Sira looked at him with gratitude and pain in her eyes. You would do that? For strangers, he nodded. I'm a father, he said simply. I know what it means to be afraid for your child. Sira looked at her daughter, who had fallen asleep again, clutching a corner of John's jacket. You are a good man, John Hale. He gave a tired smile. Just a stubborn one. The storm raged on through the night. The small shack groaned under the wind, but inside there was warmth, light, and the quiet sound of two different worlds sharing the same breath of survival. John sat awake beside the heater, watching over them both. Every time he looked at the little girl, something inside him softened. She reminded him of Emma, his own daughter, waiting miles away. Not knowing her father was out here, risking everything for someone else's child. He leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him, but he refused to sleep. His eyes stayed on the fire, his mind full of memories, Emma's laughter, her hugs, her voice calling him Dad, now. That same word echoed in his heart when he looked at Olin. He didn't understand why, but he felt responsible. Maybe because kindness was all a father had to give when the universe turned cold. As dawn struggled to break through the endless white, John whispered quietly to himself, Hang on, girls. We'll make it through this. Outside, the storm screamed in fury, but inside, hope had found a home by the second morning. The storm showed no mercy. The wind had grown stronger, rattling the walls of the small shack as though it wanted to tear everything apart. John Hale had made his decision. He could not wait for rescue. Sira's mate was dead. The wreckage of their ship was still out there somewhere, and others might be alive, trapped under ice and snow. The human father in him refused to ignore it. He would venture into the storm again, no matter the cost. He packed what supplies he could carry: rations, heating cells. A medical kitten secured the small beacon Sarah had managed to salvage from the ship. The girl, Olin, still half asleep under layers of blankets, stirred when she felt him moving. She reached out her tiny hand, confused and frightened. John bent down and held her hand gently. I'm coming back, he said softly. I promise I'll bring help. Her small blue eyes blinked at him, full of trust and fear. Sira's hand brushed against his arm, her touch warm despite the cold. Please, be careful, she whispered. I will, he said. I have to. He stepped into the white wasteland, the world disappearing around him in a swirl of snow and ice. Each step was a battle. The frozen ground cut into his boots, and the wind whipped against his body like a living whip. Every breath stung, every movement felt heavier than the last. Yet he pressed on, following faint energy traces from the crash site, hoping to find survivors. Hours passed. The landscape was a frozen maze, white and endless. His vision blurred from frost on his visor. Muscles ached, lungs burned, and his fingers were numb despite thick gloves. Yet his determination did not falter. He thought of Emma, of her small hand waiting for his. of her voice calling Dad. That thought was stronger than the storm, stronger than the cold, stronger than fear. Then, faintly, through the wind, he saw it, the wreckage. Twisted metal and ice cradled the remains of their ship. His heart skipped. Some were gone, frozen in seats. Others might still be alive. He moved carefully, checking each section of the ship, searching for any signs of life. Inside, 2 aliens lay lifeless, frozen like statues. John swallowed hard, feeling a pang of sorrow, but he didn't stop. He gathered what supplies he could: medpacks, extra blankets, and a small transmitter, and covered the bodies with a tarp. A small gesture of respect as he prepared to leave. A movement at the edge of his vision froze him. The storm had brought visitors of a different kind, white wolves with jagged, crystalline teeth, their eyes glowing faintly through the snow. Predators of the wasteland, drawn to the scent of life. John's hand went to his flare gun. He fired into the air. A burst of red light lit the sky and scared the wolves momentarily, but one lunged. Its claws sliced through the wind, aiming for him. He swung the flare gun like a hammer, striking the beast. Pain shot up his arm as it retaliated, but he fought relentlessly, striking again and again until the last wolf retreated into the storm. His body screamed in pain. Blood ran down his arm, frozen almost instantly by the cold. Frost had already claimed parts of his face and hands. Every step back toward the shack was agony. Each gust of wind felt like knives slicing through his skin. But John refused to collapse. He carried the supplies, thinking of Sira and Olin waiting for warmth and safety. Halfway back, he stumbled over a hidden ice ridge, falling hard. Snow piled over him like a tomb, but he dug himself out, pushing through the pain. His body was failing, frostbite creeping into his toes and fingers. But he did not stop. Finally, the outline of the shack appeared through the white chaos. The sight brought a surge of relief and hope. He staggered to the door, barely able to lift his foot over the threshold. Inside, warmth hit him like a wave, and the smell of burning fuel and blankets was paradise compared to the frozen hell outside. He collapsed near the heater, letting the supplies fall beside Sira and Olin. The child stirred, sensing the warmth returning to the room. Sira's eyes widened in concern as she saw his state. "John, you're hurt," she said, rushing to him. "I'm fine," he said, his voice cracking from exhaustion and pain. "They're alive. That's what matters." Sira pressed a hand to his chest, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like this. You could have died." John shook his head, a faint smile breaking through the ice and blood. I couldn't leave them." He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the fire creeping into his frozen body, and for the first time allowed himself to rest, but only for a moment. There were still lives to save. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a human father had walked into the heart of death itself and returned inside the small shack. The fire sputtered but fought to keep the cold at bay. John Hale sat back against the wall, every muscle in his body aching, his frostbitten fingers wrapped around a warm blanket. Sira and Olin huddled close to the heater, their blue skin slowly regaining warmth. The storm outside continued its relentless roar, a reminder that the world beyond the shack was merciless. But inside there was safety, for now. Sira watched John carefully, her glowing eyes full of concern and gratitude. "You're bleeding," she said softly, pointing to the long gash on his arm. "It's deep. Infection. It could kill you if you don't get treatment. John looked at her, a tired smile on his lips. I'll be fine, he said, but even to him it sounded hollow. Every inch of his body ached. Frostbite had claimed several fingers, and his muscles were on fire from overexertion. Yet he had no intention of slowing down, not while Sira and Olan needed him. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why risk yourself for strangers? John looked at the sleeping child, her small hand curling around a frayed piece of his jacket. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the tiny shivers that betrayed the lingering cold in her body. And he thought of Emma, his own daughter, waiting back home in warmth, laughter, and safety. His chest tightened. Because I know what it means to love someone, he said simply. A father doesn't leave their child behind. Sarah pressed her hand over her heart, understanding the depth of what he said, even if the words weren't fully hers. She had seen humans care in ways her people could not imagine. This man, this human, had risked his life in a storm that could have killed him a dozen times over, just to keep her daughter alive. You are extraordinary, she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. John shrugged, almost embarrassed. Maybe, or maybe just stubborn. But you and Olan, you're safe now. That's all that matters. He moved closer to the heater, his arm pressed against the wall for support. The pain was intense, but he couldn't rest too long. He needed to keep watch. The storm could trap them for days, and the temperature was dropping again. He glanced at the small window and saw the snow piling higher outside, the wind bending the skeletal trees like they were made of paper. Olan stirred in her sleep, muttering softly. John reached out and brushed the hair from her glowing blue face. She blinked up at him, half awake, and whispered something in her alien tongue. Sira leaned over and translated, her voice soft. She dreamed you went back into the snow and never came back. John felt a chill knot from the storm butt, from the weight of that thought. He squeezed the child gently. I told you, kiddo. Not yet. I'm not going anywhere. I'll get us through this. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. You carry too much alone. You must rest. John shook his head. I can't. Not while you two are still weak. I'll rest when you're stronger. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. John rotated the heating packs, stirred the small fire, and checked the blankets over the two aliens. He kept them fed with small sips of water and warm broth, monitoring every shiver, every breath. Each time the child whimpered or the woman coughed, his heart clenched at one point. Sira asked quietly, Do you have a family? John smiled faintly, thinking of Emma. I have a daughter. She's back at the outpost, safe. But I imagine she'd want to know about you and Olan, that you're both alive because someone cared. Sira's eyes softened, a mix of awe and gratitude. You are more than human, John Hale. You are a father in every way that matters. He chuckled softly, leaning back against the wall. I'm just a man trying to do the right thing. That's all any father can do. The storm raged outside, howling like it could tear the world apart. But inside there was warmth, safety, and the quiet, unspoken promise of a human father. He would protect them. He would survive. And he would not let this storm take their lives, not when he still had strength to give. As the night pressed on, John sat between the woman and the child, his arms close to them both. He whispered softly, not fully expecting a reply. I promise. I'll get us through this. You'll live, and you'll see another sunrise. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, hope held its ground. The storm showed no mercy. Night had fallen, though outside it was impossible to tell, swallowed entirely by blinding white snow and howling wind. Inside the small shack, John Hale sat with his back to the metal wall, soaked and shivering. He had patched up his wounds as best as he could, but every movement brought a stabbing pain through his arm and shoulders. Frost had claimed his toes and fingers, and the heat packs were nearly spent. Still, he refused to sleep. Sira and Olin depended on him. Olin whimpered softly in her sleep, pulling her mother's sleeve for comfort. John reached over and gently brushed her pale, icy hair from her face. "It's okay, kiddo," he whispered. "I'm right here. Nothing's going to hurt you now." Sira watched him quietly, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. "You don't even know us. You could have stayed safe in your outpost, but you risked everything." John's gaze met hers. Exhaustion lined his face, but his voice was steady. "Because I have a daughter," he said. "I can't imagine someone leaving her to die. And you too. You're like my children now. That's enough for me." The woman's lips trembled as she looked at him, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You are unlike any human I've met," she said. "Your heart, it's stronger than the storm itself." John managed a small, tired smile. "I don't feel strong. I feel afraid all the time. But fear doesn't stop a father, Sira. A father keeps moving, no matter how cold or dark it gets." The hours dragged on. The wind outside screamed, rattling the shack, and snow piled higher against the walls, threatening to bury them. John fed Olin small sips of warm water and broth, rocking her gently until she fell asleep again. Sira rested beside the heater, but her arm ached from holding her daughter so long. John kept watch, rotating heat packs and stoking the small fire. He listened to the wind, watching for any sign of the storm breaking or predators venturing closer. Each creak of the shack made his heart jump. His body ached, his vision blurred from exhaustion, and yet he refused to rest more than a few minutes at a time. At one point, Olin cried again. She had dreamt of John walking back into the storm and never returning. The sound pulled at his chest like a knife. He picked her up, holding her close against his chest. "I promise," he whispered, "I won't go anywhere. I'm staying right here with you." Sira watched him quietly, understanding the depth of what he had risked. "You have given us life," she said softly. "Even if you were lost in this storm, even if you had fallen, you would not leave us behind." John felt a lump in his throat. "I couldn't, not while I still breathe, not while you both need me." The night stretched endlessly. Every minute outside felt like an hour, every gust of wind like an attempt to tear them apart. But John kept vigil, moving carefully, checking blankets, feeding the child, and keeping Sarah warm. At times, he murmured quietly to her in human, telling stories of his daughter back on Earth, of the games they played, the snow they once made together. Olin listened faintly in her sleep, comforted by his voice even if she didn't understand the words. Sira finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You carry more than anyone should. You've risked your life again and again, but even now, you continue to protect us." "How?" John's lips pressed into a line. "Because I have to. Because I can. Because no one else is here to do it." He paused. "And because I know what it means to love someone enough to face death for them. That's what being a father means. The small shack groaned as another gust rattled the roof, but inside there was warmth, quiet, and a fragile thread of hope. John's eyes never left Olin or Sira, his body trembling from cold and pain. But his heart was steady. As the night pressed on, he whispered softly to himself and to them, "I'll keep you alive. I'll see the sun rise again. You'll survive this storm, because I will not fail you." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a human father kept a small blue child and her mother alive with nothing but determination, love, and the stubborn strength that refused to let the frozen world take them. The storm had not relented. But through the white chaos, a faint idea of hope glimmered in John Hale's mind. The small transmitter they had salvaged from the ship could still send a signal, if only he could get it higher, clear of the drifting snow. He knew the climb would be dangerous. The ridge behind the shack was slick with ice, and the wind threatened to throw him off balance with every step. But he refused to hesitate. The lives of Sarah and Olin depended on it, and he would not fail them. He gathered the equipment carefully, wrapping the heavy transmitter in a blanket to shield it from the cold. Every movement was agony. His body was battered, frostbite claiming fingers and toes, and the gash on his arm throbbed painfully. But he swallowed the pain and forced himself upright, gripping the snow-covered ridge for support. The first few steps were slow, each one a battle against exhaustion and the storm. The wind screamed in his ears, carrying with it the scent of ice and the frozen world around him. Snow whipped against his face, blinding him, freezing his eyelashes and hair into sharp frost. But he pressed on. Every thought in his mind was of the small blue child and her mother, huddled together in the shack, waiting for him to return. His heart beat steadily, a reminder of why he had to keep moving. Halfway up the ridge, the snow gave way beneath his feet. John slipped, crashing hard against the icy slope. Pain exploded through his back and shoulder, but he forced himself to rise, digging his hands into the ice to pull himself up. His fingers were stiff, almost useless from frost, but he clenched them tightly around the transmitter. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. At the top, he planted the device in the snow, adjusting its position so the antenna pointed toward the sky. The wind threatened to rip it away, but John held it with all his remaining strength. When he finally flipped the switch, a weak green light blinked on, a signal someone was searching for them. Relief surged through him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. Then disaster struck. The ridge beneath him shifted. Ice cracked like thunder, and John felt himself falling into a hidden crevasse. He screamed as gravity pulled him down, snow and ice swallowing him. Pain ripped through his body as he tumbled, and darkness threatened to overtake him. His mind flashed to Emma, back home, and to Olin and Sira. He could not leave them. He would not. John. Sira's voice rang faintly through the storm. Somehow, she had found the shack and climbed toward him, pulling Olin behind her. Her hands, though smaller, were strong and determined. She tied blankets together, creating a lifeline, and reached into the crevasse. "Grab me," she shouted. John's frozen fingers closed around hers, and with every ounce of strength, he allowed himself to be pulled upward. Pain shot through his body, every muscle screaming, but he reached the edge. Sarah and Olin helped him over the ridge, wrapping him in blankets, pressing heat packs to his body, whispering words of gratitude and concern. He laughed weakly, a low, cracked sound. "Guess I'm getting old," he muttered, shivering violently, his body barely responding. Syrah's glowing eyes filled with tears. "You saved us again," she said. "And still you fight for us. You are incredible." John shook his head, exhausted beyond measure. "I don't feel incredible," he whispered. "I feel like a father who can't let his children die." Olon reached out a small hand, touching his cheek. Her tiny fingers were almost too cold to feel. "Thank you," she murmured in her soft alien language. Syrah translated. "She says you are her hero." John smiled faintly, leaning back against the ridge. "I'm just a stubborn man who won't give up," he said. And for once, he allowed himself a moment of rest, letting the warmth of their gratitude flow into him, keeping the storm at bay. If only for a moment. The green light of the transmitter blinked steadily, a beacon of hope cutting through the endless white. Rescue was on its way. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, a human father had defied death, once again fighting frost, ice, and gravity itself to ensure that two lives, so far from his own world, would not end in the frozen wastes. And though John's body trembled and his strength was nearly gone, his heart was steady. He would survive. He would bring them through this, because a father's promise was stronger than any storm.